Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Interdisciplinary and Trans-Disciplinary Studies, SOITS, Certificate Postgraduate Certificate Programs. Postgraduate Certificate in Climate Change, PGCCC. MEV 023 Mitigation and Adaptation to Climate Change. Block-1 Introduction to Mitigation and Adaptation. Unit-1 Concept of Mitigation and Adaptation. 1.1 Introduction. One of the greatest, if not the challenges facing humanity in the 21st century is the problem of environment degradation. Within environment, climate change arising due to the increasing concentration of greenhouse gases, GHG, in the atmosphere. Since the pre-industrial times emerged as a serious global environmental issue and poses a threat and challenge to mankind. To address these challenges, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCC, makes an attempt to bring all countries to report to the convention on a regular basis a comprehensive and comparable inventory of anthropogenic greenhouse gases and the steps taken to protect the climate. The world is warming and a concerted effort is required in the coming years and decades to avoid a global temperature rise beyond 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and the consequent impacts of catastrophic climate change on people and the biodiversity. In this context, we are faced with two challenges: how to reduce the emission, and how to live with the consequence of global warming. In technical terms, these two aspects are considered as the two pillars of climate change, namely mitigation and adaptation. The terms adaptation and mitigation are two important terms that are fundamental in the climate change debate. To investigate and draw evidence on the global warming, global policy makers constituted the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, which scientifically reports the facts and details of the global emissions and warming. According to IPCC, climate mitigation is any action taken to permanently eliminate or reduce the long-term risk and hazards of climate change to human life, property. Technically, climate mitigation is also defined as an anthropogenic intervention to reduce the sources or enhance the sinks of greenhouse gases. IPCC defines adaptation as adjustments made in natural or human systems in response to actual or expected climatic stimuli or their effects, which moderates harm or exploits beneficial opportunities. IPCC, 2014. Various types of adaptation can be distinguished, including anticipatory and reactive adaptation, private and public adaptation, and autonomous and planned adaptation. IPCC, 2001. The interrelationships between mitigation and adaptation are significant in climate policy discourse. They are explained in the Unit 8 of MEV 023. While mitigation tackles the causes of climate change, adaptation tackles the effects of the phenomenon. In general, the more mitigation there is, the less will be the impacts to which we will have to adjust, and the less the risks for which we will have to try and prepare. Conversely, less mitigation means greater climatic change, and consequently requiring more adaptation is the basis for the urgency surrounding reductions in greenhouse gases. Mitigation includes all action not just to reduce the emission but also removing the GHG carbon from the environment, more popularly known as carbon sinking or sequestering. In this unit, we would discuss about the concept of mitigation and adaptation. 1.2 Objective. After studying this unit, you should be able to explain the concept of mitigation and adaptation in climate change. 1.3 Means of mitigation and regulatory measures. The most important component in mitigation is the scientific consensus on global warming, together with the precautionary principle and the fear of abrupt climate change leading to increased effort to develop new technologies and sciences and carefully manage others in an attempt to mitigate global warming. Unfortunately, most means of mitigation appear effective only for preventing further warming, not at reversing existing warming. The Stern Review report, which is world's first economic report on climate change, identified several ways of mitigating climate change. These include reducing demand for emissions-intensive goods and services, increasing efficiency gains, increasing use and development of low-carbon technologies, and reducing non-fossil fuel emissions. Many of the mitigation actions, meaning changes to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, have significant co-benefits in public health, energy security, environmental sustainability, and financial saving. Some examples of mitigation opportunities are linked to more sustainable land and forest management, to cleaner energy, such as hydro or geothermal power, and creation of sustainable urban transport systems. Regulatory measures. Some countries like the European Union, EU, have set targets of limiting global temperature rise to 2°C compared to pre-industrial levels. This includes specifying the level of emission and the limit to which CO2 levels will be stabilized. Some interventions are direct, limiting the production of fossil fuel production or introducing quotas. Other interventions also include biofuels and mandatory blending requirements in a way to control the use of fossil fuel, reduction in fuel subsidies, and introduction of carbon tax. A carbon tax is a price instrument and typically operates by taxing the carbon content of fuel inputs, thus creating an incentive either to switch to lower carbon fuels or to use fuel more efficiently. However, because governments have imperfect information about the costs of fuel switching or increasing energy efficiency, there is corresponding uncertainty about how much abatement will actually occur for a given tax level. 1.4 Technology innovations. Mitigation of emission can also be carried through new scientific techniques as proposed by Pakala and Sokolow of Princeton, which would reduce emission by 1 billion metric tons per year. They had suggested 15 different programs, ranging from using more fuel-efficient vehicles, reducing the distance traveled by vehicles, efficient building, transforming thermal coal plants, capturing and storing carbon, capture and use of hydrogen, use of nuclear fuel, use of wind turbines, generation of solar power, use of biomass for fuel production, stop deforestation, and conservation tillage in agriculture. Mitigation measures include use of renewable energy, use of carbon sinks, carbon credits, and taxation aimed to reduce GHG emission. More radical proposals too are grouped with mitigation, including biosequestration of atmospheric carbon dioxide and geoengineering techniques ranging from carbon sequestration as CO2 capture, solar radiation management, and creation of stratospheric sulfur aerosols. Table 1.1 Key mitigation technology and practices, sector-wise. Look at the screen. 1.5 Planning. Most of the mitigation effort can be initiated by planning. Most countries have specific time-based planning, and the mitigation strategy can be incorporated into plan targets for the period. Among the mitigating measures in energy sector, the mitigating potential lies in energy efficiency and conservation, which provide increment benefits like reducing transmission losses through better insulation, fluorescent lighting and transportation. Energy conservation is the practice of increasing the efficiency of energy use, and higher output can be produced at the same level of energy consumption. Residential building, commercial buildings, transportation have a significant impact on energy consumption. Specifically, industrial sector uses 38% of total energy, closely followed by the transportation sector at 28%, the residential sector at 19% and the commercial sector at 16%. Poor planning of infrastructure and inefficient land use leads to greater waste of energy. Hence, urban planning with focus on climate mitigation can greatly reduce greenhouse gases emissions. Developments like new urbanism, which exhibit features like transit-oriented development, public transit, mixed-use planning, etc., have climate mitigation potential. 1.6 Market mechanisms. Mitigation can also be initiated through market mechanism. Notable among them are clean development mechanisms, CDM, emission trading and carbon credits, and cap and trade system. 1.6. 1. Clean development mechanism. The clean development mechanism is one of the innovative features of the Kyoto Protocol to the UNFC. It encourages investments in projects that provide sustainable development in developing countries, while at the same time limits GHG emissions. The CDM was introduced in Article 12 of the Protocol. Under this mechanism, legal entities in developed countries can invest in projects in developing countries that reduce GHG emissions. Once certified, these emission reductions can be used to meet the commitments made by the developed countries. Although there are no immediate targets for the developing countries, it can be seen as an additional source of foreign direct investment, FDI, in national emission reduction mitigation projects, which would contribute to sustainable development and a decrease in worldwide GHG emission levels. A transaction in certified emission reduction, CER, trading, an important instrument of CDM projects, involves buying of GHG emission credits by entities from companies or government involved in projects related with carbon emission reduction, mostly in developing countries. The idea is to make developed countries pay for their GHG emissions while at the same time rewarding countries with good behavior. For example, a company in India can prove that it has prevented emission of X tons of carbon. It can sell this amount of points or carbon credits to a company, say the US, which has been emitting carbon. This allows industries in developed countries to offset their emission of carbon dioxide by investing in reforestation and clean energy projects in developing countries, such as plantations, as lucrative alternatives to reducing emission. 1 June 2002 Emission trading. Emission trading, as mentioned in CDM, is an administrative approach used to control pollution by providing economic incentives for achieving reductions in the emissions of pollutants. The term emission trading refers to a market where for specified pollutants, parties can buy or sell allowances or permits for emission, or credits for reductions in emission. In this market, tradable units are either allocated by the regulatory body or produced by GHG emission reduction projects. Participants who emit less GHG than allowed can sell their leftover allowances at market price. Project-based transactions involve buyers purchasing emission credit can demonstrate GHG emission reductions compared with what would have happened otherwise. There is also an expanding retail segment that also sells emissions reduction to individuals and companies wanting to voluntarily offset their carbon emission footprints. Carbon credits correspond to a determined tradable quantity of GHG emissions. They are essentially a permit to emit 1 metric tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. The goal is to achieve a zero net increase in GHG emissions because each tons of increased emission is offset by project-based reductions. Credit can be exchanged between business and individuals or bought or sold in international markets at the prevailing market price. Carbon credits create potential market for reducing GHG by giving a monetary value to emissions, in effect making emission a commodity. Credit can be used to finance carbon reduction schemes between trading partners and around the world. 1st June 2003 Emission Trading Modalities, Cap and Trade System. Emission trading is sometimes also called cap and trade. The overall goal of an emission trading plan is to reduce emissions. The cap is usually lowered over time aiming towards a national emission reduction targets. In other systems, a portion of all traded credits must be retired, causing a net reduction in emission each time a trade occurs. Kyoto is a cap and trade system that imposes national caps on the emission countries. On average, this cap requires countries to reduce their emissions 5.2% below their 1990 baseline over the 2008 to 2012 period. Although these caps are national level commitment, in practice most countries will devolve their emission targets to individual industrial entities such as a power plant or paper factory. The transaction is generally done through a national fund or agency, as in the case of the Dutch government's ERUPT program, or via collective funds such as World Bank's Prototype Carbon Fund, PCF. Several non-Kyoto carbon markets are existent like the New South Wales Greenhouse Gas Abatement Scheme, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, the Chicago Climate Exchange, the state of California's recent initiative to reduce emissions. These initiatives get linked into a single market. The first step for the cap and trade program is deciding which GHG and emission sources are covered and who is responsible for holding allowances. Some sectors that might be included under the cap are electric power, manufacturing, transportation or fossil fuel use. 1.7 Social mechanisms. Mitigation policies like energy-efficient technologies, market-based eco-taxes and tradable permits are well known, but implementation proves difficult on account of the way people perceive and think about climate problem, the way the bureaucracies work and the interest shaping government action. Policy action requires shifting political incentives and even organizational responsibilities. It requires the active marketing of climate policies, tapping into social norms and behaviors in order to translate the public concerns into understanding action starting at home. Another method of mitigation is the new tradable concept of personal carbon credits. The idea will encourage and motivate individuals to reduce their carbon footprints by the way they live. This can be accumulated even at social or business points. Each citizen will receive a free annual quota of carbon that they can use to travel, buy food and go about their business. It has been suggested that by using this concept it could actually solve two problems. pollution and poverty, it can also provide social security for old age pensioners who would gain credits and cash on the quota and get to pay lesser bills. 1.8 Mitigation cost and benefits. Development goals are threatened by climate change and more heavily impacts poor countries and poor people who are least responsible for the present condition. However, climate change cannot be controlled unless both rich and poor countries become less GHG intensive, which would mean efforts that bear some cost. There are two dimensions that emerge when to initiate mitigation and to what level of mitigation cost needs to be incurred now that would outweigh the benefits accruing in the future. Though the cost of climate change is primarily borne by the society, but the cost will affect individual in terms of health cost, enterprise profits, and damage to property and loss of lives. The mitigation agenda will differ according to region and national circumstances, technology availability for reduction, environmental status, economic condition and social dimension. The dependence on fossil fuel can hardly be unavoidable given the inadequacy of alternatives. At the same time, action needs to be done immediately as GHG released will be felt for decades, even millennia, and making a return to a safe level very difficult. The inertia in the climate system limits the possibility of making up for modest efforts with accelerated mitigation in the future. Delays also increase the costs because impacts worsen and cheaper options disappear as economies become locked into high carbon infrastructure and lifestyles. More inertia. Mitigation cost will increase over time to cope with growing population and energy needs, but so will income. It is reported that the global mitigation cost fall in the range between 0.3 and 0.7% of global GDP, 2008, and developing countries in range of 0.5 to 1.2% of their GDP. Very often the benefits justify mitigation cost. Benefit cost analysis is a crucial tool for policy evaluation in the unavoidable context of competing priorities and scarce resources. The economic loss can be estimated from the decline in production or damage to property in the case of impacts, but many a times monetized costs and benefits can too easily omit non-market environmental goods and services and becomes difficult to ascertain future risks. Many a times, multi-criteria approaches can provide an easier trade-off that are difficult to express in monetary terms. Multi-criteria approach lists the benefit and compares the trade-off cost together in a comparative format. Many a times, the loss is also estimated in tolerable window approach, which give the boundaries of acceptable risk and cost of mitigation. There exists large uncertainties about the potential losses associated with climate change, and the possibility of catastrophic risks may well justify earlier and more aggressive action than a simple benefit cost analysis would suggest. The incremental cost invested could be considered as insurance premium to keep climate change within safe limits. 1.9 Summary. Climate change is a serious challenge impacting our lives. There are two pillars in climate change management, namely mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation are effort made to reduce the emission rates and to remove the carbon present in the air. Mitigation can be carried out through different methods like regulation, technology, planning, market mechanism, and social mechanisms. Mitigation benefits are important since they justify the cost, which can be measured. Mitigation can be undertaken at different levels of urgency based on the need for the same and varies with the technology level, national circumstances. Mitigation cost has a precautionary aspect and can be considered as an insurance against future cost or damage. Climate change and mitigation is a global phenomenon and international cooperation is needed for better welfare outcome, and many initiatives have been made at the global level. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.